I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd sit down and actually tell a story like this. I'm not proud of it, and I'm not looking for sympathy. I was just broke, tired, and trying to survive in Las Vegas. I worked as a nightclub dancer, the kind of job people joke about but never really understand. Rent was always late, tips came and went, and every night felt like the same blur of bad music, cheap cologne, and fake smiles. I wasn't some mastermind or a thrill seeker. Honestly, I was just tired of being the one people stepped on. Then I got involved with the wrong people. Russians. Not the movie kind with fancy suits and gold chains, but the real ones who talk soft and make you realize you're disposable. One day I was just hustling for a few extra dollars, and a few months later I was standing there with 8 million of their money in my hands, wondering if I'd just signed my own death sentence. This is not a fairy tale. It's not even a story I like to tell. But people always say Vegas is built on secrets. So here's mine. A dancer who got in too deep, crossed the Russian Mafia, and somehow came out with $8 million. Don't ask me if it was worth it, you'll figure that out by the end. Subscribe if you want to hear the whole thing, because once it starts, it doesn't stop. I came to Vegas with 2 suitcases and a list of bad decisions already behind me. People like me don't move to Las Vegas to chase dreams, we come here because we've run out of places to hide. I was 23, broke, and already good at pretending that everything was fine. I thought working in a nightclub would be temporary. You know how people always say, just for a while, until I figure things out. That was me. Only, a while turned into years, and the longer I stayed, the harder it was to imagine getting out. The club wasn't glamorous. People outside think it's all champagne and music videos, but really it's sticky floors, drunk tourists, and managers who treat you like furniture that breathes. My nights started at 10, ended around 6 in the morning, and I'd usually drag myself home smelling like a mix of tequila, sweat, and cheap perfume. Rent ate up most of my money, and whatever was left went to food, cigarettes, and the occasional escape into slot machines that I swore I'd never touch again. I kept telling myself I wasn't like the others, that I had a plan. Truth is, I didn't. It was in that club that I first noticed them. The Russians. They weren't regulars, not at first. They showed up once a month maybe, sitting in the corner like they owned the place, never loud, never sloppy. That's what made them stand out. Everyone else in Vegas tried too hard, flashing money and pretending to be big shots. These guys didn't need to pretend. They had that look in their eyes, the kind that makes you avoid eye contact because you know if they notice you, your night just got complicated. I avoided them at first. I learned to spot danger early, and everything about them screamed it. But avoiding people in a nightclub is like trying not to breathe secondhand smoke. Eventually it gets to you. One night, one of them asked for me. I didn't think I had a choice. My manager practically shoved me toward their table with that fake smile he used whenever money was involved. The man who spoke the most wasn't the biggest, but you could tell he was in charge. His accent was thick, but his words were slow, careful. He wasn't there to flirt. He asked questions like he was studying me, where I was from, how long I'd been in Vegas, if I liked my job. I answered because saying nothing wasn't an option. When he laughed, it wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like he already knew everything you didn't want to say. They tipped well, better than most. 100 here, 500 there, like it was nothing. Money like that makes you forget instincts. I told myself it was just business, that I wasn't different from any other dancer they paid to sit with them. But deep down, I knew they didn't throw money around without expecting something back. Nothing in Vegas is free, especially not from men like that. Weeks passed, and they kept showing up. Not every night, not even every week, but enough that I started to recognize their patterns. They never got drunk. They never stayed too long. And every time they left, I felt like the air in the room finally loosened. I tried to convince myself it was just another group of rich guys passing through, but I knew better. I could feel it. The way the staff treated them, the way security kept their distance, it wasn't normal. I wish I could say I was smart enough to stay away, but survival makes you flexible. One night, after a fight with my landlord about late rent, I sat down at their table willingly. Maybe it was the vodka they sent over, maybe it was the desperation crawling under my skin, but I stayed longer than usual. And that night, the man in charge, he told me his name was Victor, though I doubt it was real, offered me what he called easy work. He said they needed someone to look after things. That was all he gave me. No details, just a hint that it paid better than the club ever would. My first instinct was to say no, but my mouth betrayed me. I asked what kind of things. He smiled, and it was the first time he looked almost human. Then he slid an envelope across the table. Inside was more cash than I'd seen in one place in my entire life. He said it was just for considering. That envelope changed everything. It sat in my bag for 2 days, and every time I looked at it, the voice in my head screamed to walk away. But my fridge was empty, my rent overdue, and my boss at the club already talking about cutting shifts. Fear and hunger beat out common sense. By the end of the week, I called the number he had written on a napkin. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment my life stopped being mine. When I called the number, I expected some kind of formal meeting. Instead, it was short and blunt. A man answered, didn't say his name, just told me to be at a certain bar off the strip the next night at 9. Not the kind of bar tourists go to. This place had no neon, no fake glitz. Just a cracked sign and a smell of spilled beer and cigarettes that never left the carpet. The kind of place where people kept their heads down. I showed up on time, which already made me stand out. The bartender barely looked at me, but a man at the corner table nodded. It wasn't Victor. This guy was younger, shaved head, leather jacket that looked heavy even in the Vegas heat. He didn't waste words. He just slid a small bag across the table and told me to deliver it to an address written on a card. He said someone would be waiting. He said I'd get paid after. I sat there staring at the bag like it might explode. It wasn't heavy, just awkward. I wanted to ask what was inside, but I didn't. I already knew the answer wouldn't be good. So I took it. Driving across town with that bag on the passenger seat felt like carrying a bomb. My car wasn't anything special, an old Honda with the AC barely working, but I'd never been more aware of every cop on the street. My palms were slick on the wheel. I kept telling myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, not technically. But it didn't matter. I felt guilty just breathing. The address led me to a rundown apartment building. Paint peeling, bars on the windows, neighbors pretending not to notice. I knocked on the door like the card said. A man opened it, didn't smile, didn't say hello. He just took the bag, counted something inside, and shut the door in my face. That was it. I stood there for a minute, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. When I got back to the bar, the guy with the shaved head gave me an envelope. Inside, $2,000 in cash. More than I made in a month at the club. For a 20-minute errand. That was the hook. You don't realize you're being reeled in until the line is too tight. I told myself it was just a one-time thing, that I'd take the money, pay my rent, maybe even save a little. But the phone rang again the next week. Another drop. Then another. Each time, a little more money. And each time, a little less fear. By the fourth run, I stopped asking myself what was inside the bags. Money, drugs, maybe weapons, I didn't want to know. All I knew was the envelopes kept getting thicker. And Victor noticed. He started showing up again at the club, giving me that look that felt less like interest and more like ownership. It wasn't long before he offered me something bigger. Not just deliveries. He said they needed someone who could blend in. His words, not mine. Someone who didn't look like the kind of person cops would follow. A girl in heels and too much makeup was invisible in Vegas. I hated that he was right. The job was simple on paper. He gave me a keycard to a hotel room. My part was to go in, grab a suitcase, and walk out like I belonged there. He said no one would question it. The keycard worked, just like he promised. The room was empty except for the suitcase. Black, medium size, heavy as hell. I didn't open it. I didn't want to. Walking through that lobby, dragging the suitcase behind me, I felt like everyone was staring. Like the whole world knew. But no one stopped me. No one even looked twice. Vegas is full of people carrying things they shouldn't. When I handed it over, Victor was waiting this time. He smiled, that thin, humorless smile, and told me I'd just earned $10,000. He handed me the cash in a plain brown envelope, like it was nothing. My hands were shaking when I took it, but I didn't say no. That night, lying in my apartment with the envelope under my pillow, I thought about walking away. 10,000 was enough to disappear, at least for a while. I could have packed a bag, left Vegas, started fresh somewhere nobody knew me. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't broke. For the first time, I felt like I mattered. And that feeling is addictive. More addictive than the money, more than the adrenaline. I was no longer just another dancer at some club. I was useful. Important. Needed. That was the real trap. Over the next few months, the jobs kept coming. I told myself I was just a courier, just moving things from one place to another. But deep down I knew. The bags got heavier, the money got thicker, and the looks from Victor got colder. I wasn't working with them. I was working for them. And once you're in, there's no clean way out. By the time 6 months passed, I had 2 different versions of myself. There was the girl in the club, spinning around the pole, smiling at men who thought $100 made them kings. And then there was the one who answered the phone when Victor called, the one who picked up bags and dropped off envelopes like it was normal. Those 2 lives barely touched, but the gap between them was closing, whether I wanted it to or not. I stopped being afraid of the jobs, which was dangerous. At first, I'd sweat through my clothes just walking across a lobby with one of their suitcases. Now, I'd stroll out with barely a thought. The rush of panic was gone, replaced with something worse, routine. I was part of their machine, and I barely noticed the gears turning. But the money changed me. I wasn't rich, not really, but I was finally stable. My rent was always paid on time, I had a nicer car, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to count every dollar before buying groceries. My friends at the club noticed. They'd ask how I suddenly had new clothes or why I didn't complain about money anymore. I always had an excuse, said I picked up another side hustle, or that I was better at managing tips. Nobody questioned it too hard. In Vegas, you learn not to. The line between helping them and becoming one of them blurred fast. Victor started trusting me with more. Sometimes he'd have me sit at the table while deals were happening. I wasn't expected to say anything, just to be there. A distraction, maybe, or a signal that things were casual. But I listened. I started piecing together how they moved money through casinos, how they laundered cash in businesses that didn't even look open. It wasn't just a couple of guys having fun in Vegas. It was an operation. One night, after another job, Victor poured me a drink. He asked if I was tired of dancing. I said yes before I even thought about it. He smirked, said there was more important work for someone like me. Then he leaned closer and told me something that stuck. Once you take their money, you're theirs. There's no walking away. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like a strange kind of comfort. I didn't belong anywhere else. At least here I mattered. The turn came when one of their deals went bad. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it the next day. A man they trusted took off with a cut of money, hundreds of thousands. They found him, of course. Or what was left of him. Word spread fast, not because anyone said it out loud, but because nobody said anything at all. The silence was louder than screams. I realized then that I wasn't just running errands. I was standing next to people who would kill without hesitation. And yet I didn't run. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that as long as I kept my head down and did what I was told, I was safe. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Safety didn't exist here. The paranoia crept in slowly. I started checking my rearview mirror more often. I noticed men watching me in places I hadn't seen them before. Sometimes I'd get a phone call and no one would answer, just silence. At night, when I closed my eyes, I'd hear the thump of bass from the club mixed with the echo of Victor's voice telling me I was theirs. And then came the night that changed everything. It started like any other job. A hotel, another suitcase. Only this time, when I got to the room, something was off. The door wasn't latched properly. Inside, the suitcase was there, but it wasn't closed. I don't know why I looked. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe stupidity. But I opened it. Stacks of cash. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. Neat, crisp bundles, packed so tight the suitcase barely closed. I stood there frozen, my hands shaking, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't thousands. It was millions. In that moment, something snapped. I thought about every night I'd gone home exhausted, every time I'd scraped together rent, every insult, every man who thought I was nothing more than a body to look at. And here it was. A fortune, just sitting in a suitcase. I closed it fast, dragged it out, delivered it like I was supposed to. But my brain wouldn't stop. That money haunted me. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. All I could think about was what it would feel like to take it. To finally be free. For the first time, I thought about betraying them. Once you let the thought of stealing sink in, it never leaves. At first, it was just a fantasy, something I'd daydream about when the music at the club was too loud or when Victor's voice got too sharp. But the fantasy grew teeth. It kept me awake at night. I'd picture myself driving out of Vegas with a car full of cash, crossing state lines, changing my name, finally disappearing. I told myself I deserved it. After all the risks I took, after all the fear I swallowed, wasn't I owed something? The problem was, fantasies don't pay rent, and the Russians weren't stupid. If they trusted me with millions once, it meant they were testing me. Waiting to see if I'd cross the line. The truth is, I was scared of them and scared of myself. Both fears pulled me in opposite directions. One voice in my head screamed to run, the other whispered that I might never get another chance like this. That's when the cracks started to show. My landlord noticed I was calmer about money, but I still lived in the same dump. My friends asked why I wasn't moving somewhere nicer. I didn't want attention, but even my caution looked suspicious. When you're tied to people like Victor, paranoia becomes your shadow. Then one night, Victor handed me a different kind of job. He told me I'd be alone, no backup, no one watching. A delivery across town, hotel to hotel. He pressed the keycard into my hand and looked me dead in the eyes. "Don't make mistakes," he said. That was all. When I opened the hotel room door, there it was again. Another suitcase. Bigger this time, heavier. And just like before, it wasn't locked. I told myself not to look, but my hands didn't listen. Inside, more stacks of cash. Neater, cleaner, more than before. My stomach twisted, and my chest felt tight. This wasn't just money anymore. This was my way out. I stood there for a long time, staring. I thought about every shitty night I'd spent listening to drunks call me names. I thought about Victor, about the way he looked at me like property. I thought about the stories I'd overheard, men who vanished after crossing them. I wasn't planning a heist. I wasn't smart enough for that. I was just a girl standing in a hotel room with a suitcase full of cash and a decision that would ruin my life either way. I closed it and walked out, dragging it across the carpet, through the lobby, into the parking lot. My car was there, old and dented, waiting like it had every other time. But this time, I didn't drive to the drop point. I drove home. My hands shook the whole way. Every car behind me felt like a tail. Every red light felt like a trap. By the time I pulled into the cracked driveway of my apartment, I was drenched in sweat. I dragged the suitcase inside, shut the door, and locked it 3 times. For hours I just sat there staring at it, like it might bite. When I finally opened it, the air in the room changed. The smell of paper, of ink and glue, filled my apartment. I counted until my hands cramped. The total hit me like a punch, $8 million. $8 million, in a shitty one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a fridge that barely worked. That night I didn't sleep. I stacked the money, restacked it, moved it from the suitcase to garbage bags and back again. Every sound outside made me flinch. I thought about calling anyone, but who could I trust? The cops? They'd just take it. A friend? They'd talk. In Vegas, secrets don't last. The phone rang the next morning. Victor. His voice was calm, too calm. He asked if the drop went smoothly. My throat went dry. I forced a yes, made it sound casual, tried not to breathe too loud. He paused, then said, "Good. I'll be in touch," and hung up. I knew then that the clock had started. Maybe they didn't know yet. Maybe they were testing me. But it wouldn't be long before someone figured it out. And when they did, I wouldn't just be another girl who screwed up. I'd be the one who stole $8 million from the Russian Mafia. And there's no coming back from that. The days after I took the suitcase were the longest of my life. Every second stretched out like gum stuck to the bottom of a shoe. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't even sit still. The money was everywhere in my apartment, under the bed, in the closet, stuffed inside trash bags. No matter where I hid it, I felt like it was glowing through the walls, screaming to be found. At the club, I tried to act normal. I danced, smiled, took shots with tourists, but inside I was shaking. Every time the door opened, I thought it would be Victor walking in with his men. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was the call. But for a while, nothing happened. That almost made it worse. The waiting, the silence. I started to wonder if maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they had so much money that one suitcase slipping away wasn't enough to matter. That illusion broke fast. It started with people watching me. Not obvious at first. A guy sitting too long in his car across from my apartment. A man at the bar who never ordered a drink. Different faces, but the same feeling, they weren't there for the scenery. My paranoia wasn't paranoia anymore. It was reality. Then Victor showed up at the club. He hadn't been there in weeks, maybe months. The second I saw him, my stomach dropped. He didn't look angry. He didn't look anything. Just calm, like always. He sat at the table, ordered nothing, and watched me work. The entire night, his eyes followed me. He never called me over, never said a word. Just watched. That was worse than yelling, worse than threats. It meant he knew. Or at least suspected. I went home that night convinced I'd die before morning. I locked every door, pushed furniture against them, sat on the floor with a kitchen knife in my hand like that would do anything against men like him. But no one came. The next day, I got a text. No name, just an address. My blood ran cold. That was how they summoned me when there was work. Only this time, I wasn't stupid enough to think it was work. This was something else. I debated running. I thought about grabbing the money, jumping in my car, and driving until the desert turned into mountains, then into trees, then into something that didn't feel like Vegas. But the problem was $8 million doesn't just disappear. You can't walk into a bank with it. You can't spend it without someone noticing. It was a curse as much as it was salvation. I drove to the address anyway. It was a warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place no one asked questions about. My heart hammered so loud I thought it would echo in the empty lot. I parked, sat there for 10 minutes, then finally forced myself to get out. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Victor was there, sitting on a folding chair like it was a throne. 2 other men stood behind him, silent, arms crossed. He gestured for me to sit. My legs barely worked, but I sat. He didn't accuse me. He didn't shout. He just talked. About loyalty. About trust. About how betrayal was the one thing he couldn't forgive. Every word felt like a blade pressing against my skin. Then he leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine, and asked me if I understood. I nodded. My mouth was too dry to speak. He smiled, the same thin smile I'd seen before, and stood up. Then, just like that, he walked out. The two men followed. No threats, no orders, no punishment. Nothing. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. It was worse. Because silence meant they were deciding. Watching. Waiting for me to slip. I walked out of that warehouse shaking so hard I could barely hold my keys. For the next week, I lived like a ghost. I barely left the apartment. When I did, I kept my head down, moved fast, always scanning the mirrors. I thought about the money constantly, but not in the same way as before. Now it felt like a ticking bomb. $8 million that would get me killed if I touched it, and maybe even if I didn't. One night, I came home and found my front door open. Just a crack, but open. My chest seized up. I pushed it wider with my foot, half expecting Victor to be sitting on my couch. The apartment looked normal, but I knew better. Someone had been inside. The bags of money were untouched, at least as far as I could tell. But that wasn't the point. The point was they could get to me whenever they wanted. That was the moment I realized I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to make a choice. Either give it back and pray they let me live, or run and accept that every shadow for the rest of my life would hold their faces. I didn't know which option was worse. When you're sitting on $8 million that doesn't belong to you, the idea of choice is a lie. There's no option A or option B. There's just survival, and survival doesn't care about morals. I thought about giving it back, but how do you even do that? Walk up to Victor with a suitcase and say, "Sorry, my bad." That wasn't forgiveness. That was suicide. So I ran. Or at least I tried to. I packed what I could into my car, a few clothes, a fake ID I'd bought months earlier, and as much cash as I could fit without looking insane. I didn't take it all. Taking it all would have been too obvious. I left some behind, scattered like breadcrumbs I knew they'd find. It was stupid, but I was desperate. My plan, if you can call it a plan, was to disappear. Head west, maybe to California, maybe further. Find some quiet hole to crawl into and pray the Russians didn't care enough to chase me that far. But Vegas doesn't let go of people like me. The first night on the road, I stopped at a motel 2 hours outside the city. It was one of those places where the neon sign buzzes and the sheets smell like bleach. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, clutching a stack of bills like it could protect me. That's when I heard it, a car pulling into the lot, slow, deliberate. Headlights swept across my window. Doors shut. Heavy footsteps. I didn't breathe. I waited for the knock, for the door to break open, for everything to end right there. But it didn't. The footsteps moved past. A door opened, closed. Silence. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I drove until my eyes burned. Every car behind me looked like theirs. Every gas station attendant felt like an informant. I was unraveling. And that's when it hit me, maybe that was the point. Maybe they didn't need to kill me right away. Maybe the game was to make me crack, to remind me every second that I wasn't safe. Fear as punishment. Fear as ownership. I lasted 3 weeks like that. Constant motion, cheap motels, eating fast food out of paper bags, staring at the money like it was both salvation and poison. My nerves were shot. My hands never stopped shaking. I kept waiting for the moment I'd wake up and realize it was all some nightmare. But the money was real. The fear was real. Then came the day I stopped running. I'd pulled into another nameless motel, this one in Arizona. I walked into the room, dropped my bag on the bed, and froze. The suitcase was already there. Not mine, theirs. Black, familiar, sitting in the middle of the room like a message. My knees almost gave out. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I knew what it meant. They'd found me. They wanted me to know they could walk into any room I chose, any town I thought was safe. They didn't need to kill me. They already owned me. I left the money behind that night. Not all of it. I wasn't brave enough for that, but most of it. I stuffed a few stacks in my bag and walked out. I didn't even look back at the motel. Now I'm here telling you this. I won't say where here is, because honestly it doesn't matter. Maybe they'll find me tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe never. But I've learned something: you don't really steal from the Russian Mafia. Not 8 million. Not even $8. You borrow it, and the debt never goes away. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. The money bought me time, but not freedom. Freedom is something I'll never have again, not really. I see shadows where there aren't any. I hear footsteps in empty halls. I live with the weight of knowing that any day could be the day. That's my story. A nightclub dancer who thought she could outsmart the people no one outsmarts. Who grabbed $8 million and found out it wasn't a jackpot, it was a curse. If you've listened this far, do me a favor. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Because if this story ends sooner than I'd like, at least someone out there will remember how it happened.